Hello, BookTube. It's Wednesday, and that means new comic book day when malcontent Mandalorians mosey on over to their local comic shop, their LCS, for the latest issue comic books. And I tend to do that too. I try to. There are many weeks when I don't, because there are many weeks when the inventory of that week's new releases for what's called floppies, just individual comic book issues, is of no interest to me. You can get those inventories, you can see them online now, so there's not a question of going to the comic shop to find out what's new. So instead, I go to those websites to see whether or not I should go to the comic shop, and I don't even use them for the collections that I especially like. I love collected editions, big omnibus editions, paperback color editions. You've seen plenty of them on this channel, and one of those came out today that I actually want. The Marvel Comics second Savage Sword of Conan omnibus from the years, 50 years ago when they had the franchise the last time. The first volume is such a beautifully constructed thing, and it is full of issues that I just love. So I know I want the second one. Probably the third one not. After a while, the quality on Savage Sword of Conan sort of precipitously drops and never goes back up again. Unlike the monthly color comic book, the Conan the Barbarian, where the quality drops but goes back up, drops but goes back up. There are periods, highs and lows in that. And Marvel's also bringing out $125 omnibuses of those as well. But today it was that, and the reason I didn't get it at the comic shop is because the comic shop is selling it at full price. And in just a week or two, maybe even less than that, maybe even right now in places like In Stock Trades and whatnot, I can get it for half that price, one half of that price. That's even better than I could get it with my employee discount at Barnes & Noble. So why would I do that? Why wouldn't I do that? The only reason I can think of would be to keep my comic shop in business. But my local comic shop is a chain store. It's Newbury Comics, and they have many stores in many places. So it's not like they're going out of business without my money. If I have from time to time had a local comic shop where I lived that was just personally owned, and in there I might have done it. In the case of the one collection that came out today that I know I would have wanted, which was that Savage Sword of Conan collection, there was another collection that came out today that I would have wanted if it were slightly different. I don't want it the way it is now, and you would think that it would be a dream come true, because it's on the surface it looks like a hardcover omnibus edition reprint of the greatest book of all time. I refer, of course, to the official handbook to the Marvel Universe. About 40 years ago, Marvel came out with a series of monthly comic books that were just, there was no plot, there was no MacGuffin, there was no anything like that. They were just an encyclopedia of characters. You had an originally commissioned full-color picture of the character, hero or villain. And then you had a description of them, encyclopedia style. Where they're from, what teams they're associated with, where they first appeared in Marvel Comics, and a breakdown of both their biography as far as we know it, and a very specific breakdown of their superpowers, something that DC Comics would never do. DC Comics is firmly grounded on the mythological nature of their characters. Whereas Marvel, the characters are supposed to exist in something much closer to our real world. And Stan Lee, the creator of this new iteration of Marvel Comics, and all of his following writers have followed up on that by making the characters non-nebulous. Stan Lee said right at the beginning, when Marvel Comics was starting to take off, when fans would ask him all the time, can so-and-so beat so-and-so? Can one hero beat another? And Stan Lee the answer that he gave to kids was, well, anybody can have a bad day and anybody can have a great day. So I'm not going to tell some kid that their favorite hero absolutely couldn't win against their buddy's favorite hero. I'm not going to do that. But to adults and to people who wrote letters to the comics, he would say, well, anybody can have a good day and anybody can have a bad day, but as a later writer put it, for instance, in one very, very famous fan favorite matchup against the Hulk, the Thing cannot win. Plain and simple. And the handbook of the Marvel Universe came out a long time ago, 40 years ago, and codified that in a way that even at the time I thought, this is extraordinary. How on earth you are stripping away any wiggle room from these characters' superpowers. You are telling us exactly what they can and cannot do. In the first issue, I remember vividly buying the first issue. The first issue has, for instance, it's alphabetical. So the first issue has, for instance, Angel from the X-Men, founding member of the X-Men, Warren Worthington III. And instead of just telling you that he can fly, they tell you that his bones are mostly hollow. They tell you that his maximum speeds, his maximum height before he starts to lose consciousness. They tell you about the fact that the liquid in his eyes is constituted differently in order to withstand high power, speed, and high altitude flight, and a whole bunch of other things, a whole bunch of details. That the operating principle of the official handbook of the Marvel Universe was that the writers, the researchers, would go through every appearance of that character in the comic books. So never mind what fans think, and never mind what anyone in the comics might say about some other character. Instead, let's just say what they do. We'll look at what they do. What in the comics so far, in the 40 years that the Angel has been appearing in X-Men comics, what is the highest altitude that anyone has ever drawn him, written him achieving? What is the highest speed? What is the furthest he can fly before he gets exhausted and has to stop? And a bunch of other things. And they went on from there. Angel, Beast, Absorbing Man, Ant-Man, they did an entry for each person, for each major character in the Marvel Universe, hero and villain. And that has been collected. That is collected today into a $125 hardcover omnibus edition of the official handbook of the Marvel Universe. And you might think, well, okay, if you love it so much, and you've read your issues to powder, which I have, then why wouldn't you be ecstatic at a hardcover omnibus edition? And the reason why is because after Marvel was done with the official handbook of the Marvel Universe, and a few years passed, they did an update called the Deluxe Edition of the official handbook of the Marvel Universe, in which, again, all the heroes and villains, only many more of them, had individual issues, but the details were so much greater, so much more detail. 5 times as much written work. 5 times as much detail in every entry. In the T volume of the original one, the one that was collected in today's hardcover, the Thing has a page, and we're told he grew up on Yancey Street. We're told, that his skin is largely invulnerable, but it is composed of organic rock-like material that can be dislodged, can be chipped away. Prolonged high-power gunfire, mortar fire would probably wound him. We're told that, that his fingers fuse, because, of course, famously, Ben Grimm has, a 5-fingered hand, and the Thing does not. We're told that he can lift, that is, press 85 tons. But we're told so much more about that. It goes into so much more detail, both on biography and on powers. And it does that for everybody. And I was just crestfallen when I saw that the official handbook of the Marvel Universe was getting an omnibus edition, but that it wasn't the one. Why would you do that? Why would you do that? Why wouldn't you do it for the deluxe edition that had so much more work put into it? So I don't know. I might be interested in getting the official handbook of the Marvel Universe omnibus edition, but not for full price. So I ignored both of those. And sometimes when I do that, when I look at the online inventories and ignore the collected edition for one reason or another, I end up with no reason to go. The individual issues of ongoing comic books don't end up being enough to bring me to the store. But today was different. Today there were individual issues that I wanted to show you. And the first one is, 2 of them are ongoing miniseries that we've already seen. We've seen them already on this channel. The first one is Superman, Up in the Sky. This is 5 out of 6, I believe. The cover just says 5. I don't know how many this is going to be. But these were originally the original content that was designed for, I think, Walmart, something like that. And now they're being reprinted in comic books for comic book stores so that fans who didn't go to Walmart or Kmart or whatever it was can read these issues. And the main storyline involves a little girl named Alice who has been abducted from Earth. And Superman finds out that she's been abducted and goes on a quest into deep space to find her, even though she's only one girl. And the whole world needs him. It ultimately doesn't matter. It's who he is. He cannot rest knowing that he might be able to find and save her. This is written by Tom King and drawn by Andy Kubert. It's some of Andy Kubert's most eye-poppingly beautiful artwork. And Tom King, the previous issue of this one, I got a hint of what a lot of you then told me is the curse of Tom King, which is hysterical overwriting. just unbelievable overwriting. The page is just covered in words, almost as bad as Chris Claremont at his absolutely most verbose and nowhere near as intelligent or eloquent. That marred the previous issue of Superman Up in the Sky for me quite a bit, to the point where when I got to the comic shop today, I never do what so many man blobs in the comic store do. I never just stand there and flip through issues. Please. That is so much abusing the privilege. That is such being a bad guest. You either know that you want it or you don't. You either take your chance or you don't. You don't stand there and read the whole thing just because the comic shop put it out on a rack. I don't ever do that, and I didn't do it this time, but I did briefly flip through the issue just to make sure that no page was covered in blocks of dialogue. I figured that isn't reading it. I'm still going to buy it unless I see a page that's covered like that, in which case I won't. And there weren't any. So I got this issue, and as you can see on the cover is misleading. Of course, there's no moment like this in the issue. But eventually, Superman's quest to find this little girl brings him to Apokolips, the planet Apokolips, and to Darkseid, one of DC's big bad villains, who is, all-knowing and super evil. And Darkseid tells Superman that he can give him clues to where the girl is, but he wants something in exchange. He wants Superman to help an alien being to kill himself, a mercy killing, because the alien being has an incurable and extremely painful illness. And look at this artwork. The alien being has been given a knife to kill himself by his priest doctors, but he can't do it. He doesn't have the will to do it. What he needs is an angel to help him do it. Look at that panel. Incredible. Just incredible. Darkseid sends Superman to this alien, figuring, well, if you help him commit suicide, then you've broken your oath not to kill. And if you don't help him commit suicide, then you have watched him die in agony. And either way, you are lessened, and that's the kind of thing that Darkseid loves. And that is the first story. Every one of these issues, every issue of Superman Up in the Sky splits into 2 stories. That's the first story. The second story is a little thing called The Offer that just blew me away. Just absolutely blew me away. It's all couched in dialogue. Someone is offering Superman a deal. Basically, a deal. That I will give you what you want, and in exchange, you will get your life just the way you love it. And the 10 pages of the story called The Offer is a view of that life, of Superman's life, where he wakes up, he has coffee with his wife, Lois Lane, they talk, then he takes to the sky. Look at that. Incredible. He goes to a trial. Lex Luthor is on trial and tells the people in the newsroom or in the courtroom that he will always lose, basically, that he's evil, that he doesn't understand the true heroism of the city he's trying to destroy, and that will always be his downfall. It's just page after page of pure classic Superman moments, my favorite of which is that he has lunch with his friends. And his friends are the great trinity of DC heroes. Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman. And they just talk. And they know they'll meet again because they're friends. Took a long time, might not seem like much, but it took a long time for DC Comics to get back to that, to get back to something recognizable as that, so that Batman is not in a suit of armor, so that Wonder Woman has superpowers and not just a leather jacket, so that Superman doesn't have, long hair or electrical powers, and on and on and on and on and on, and also this ridiculous New 52 business. It took a long time to get to a simple point where you could have Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman in extremely recognizable iterations of the characters just hanging out as friends instead of enemies or strangers. So that was wonderful. That was absolutely wonderful. That was a wonderful moment. It was a wonderful issue. I was very happy that I got it. And as I mentioned on these Comic Book Wednesdays, another ongoing miniseries for DC Comics. I am a big fan of DC Comics. I'm not all that interested in Marvel Comics. I know that's heresy, but nevertheless. Another ongoing miniseries for DC Comics stars not Superman, but Lois Lane. And I read Lois Lane's comic, a million years ago, 60 years ago, when she had her own comic, and followed her. I've always been intrigued by the character, and I've very much liked watching the character get better as time goes on. There's not so much you can do with Superman. He's compassionate, and he has a real world side to him, but he's not mean, and he's not petty, and he's not vindictive. And that stays true. That momentarily lapsed out of being with the New 52's iteration, but it came back, and it's back now. But Lois Lane, she the encouraging part of the character is that she's always been portrayed as a professional, as the best at her job. She's not a secretary at the Daily Star when we first meet her. She's a star reporter, and that has always been true, and I've always liked that. But that took a dinging for decades in the Julia Schwartz era, where the main thing that people knew about Lois Lane, they knew two things. One, that she was too dim to see that Superman and Clark Kent were the same person, and two, that she was feverishly scheming all the time to trick Superman into marrying her. And that doesn't do anybody any good. That doesn't do anybody any favors, no matter who you are, no matter how, even if you're some sort of knuckle dragging men's right activism. That still is just lousy story writing, and that has gone away. That has gone away completely. And the Lois Lane that we get now in the comic books, in the Superman comic books, tends to be pretty satisfying. That's been true for 30 years now, as her mythology has grown, being an army brat, being strong-willed, being right most of the time, being a source of strength for Superman instead of someone he constantly needs to rescue. And the next thing I got was the latest issue of a 12-issue miniseries of Lois Lane. And this is, I want to make sure that I get this right, because sometimes I don't. This is written by Greg Rucka. It's fantastically written. Just fantastically written. And it's drawn by Mike Perkins, who has a sort of photorealistic style that I like very much, although I had my issues with this issue. The Lois Lane in this storyline is chasing a couple of different sources of corruption. One is in Washington, and one involves the murder of a Russian journalist who wasn't particularly a friend of Lois Lane, but it bothers her. Of course, it bothers her. She wants to get to the bottom of this murder. And she doesn't use her husband to do this. Instead, she hires The Question, Renee Montoya, the update, a new pastiche on the old Charlton hero, The Question, who has a blank face. His superhero getup is that he has a blank face. He's just an unpowered vigilante who appears in a kind of a nimbus of mist, but no superpowers except his own flailing fists. And DC Comics didn't so much gender swap The Question. That is a process that unfortunately happens in comics, where you just take an established character and make them female. In order to please I don't know who. No one likes it. The only people who might even nod approvingly don't read or buy comic books, so why a comic book company would do it, I have no idea. These characters aren't yours to do that with, but we'll get to that. The reason that I have a lot more regard for the Renee Montoya Question is because it wasn't done that cheaply. It wasn't done in a ridiculous way. There was a year-long series called 52. And in that series, one of the most wonderful, touching moments in that series is when the old male version of The Question surrenders, dies. Apparently, he isn't dead. He turns out alive in this miniseries, but he seems to die in 52, and he seems to bequeath his superhero identity to Renee Montoya in a wonderful moment, a wonderfully drawn moment. So I don't so much mind. It was done with respect. It was done with forethought. It wasn't just done blithely and casually, as we're going to see in another comic book. And the question is hunting for answers to what happened to that Russian journalist. And those two plot lines are intertwining, and they're moving forward, and they're really, really well done. There's a lot of talking in this issue, and you'd think that would bother me, but it doesn't, because Greg Rucka does such a good job. Lois Lane is on a plane at the beginning of the issue, and a co-passenger of hers starts going on about how, I love your work, but some of you journalists, you just make stuff up. And that, of course, makes Lois Lane furious. And when the woman says, well, I know you don't do that, but how do you know that nobody does? It temporarily shuts Lois Lane up, because she doesn't have a good answer. And she also doesn't have a good face. This artist, Mike Perkins, sometimes his photorealistic approach to comics lets him down. I don't know what all that is. This is Lois Lane's face, this little fraction over here. Maybe she's Leto II. Maybe she's transforming into a sandworm. I don't know what all that is. That's 5 times as much room as you need. There's another thing. As long as we're knocking Mike Perkins' art, I mostly like it. But another thing that really bothers me, the Renee Montoya question finds a dive where she is going to extract information from these 2-bit thugs, and it drives me nuts because it's not realistic. And I know that's a comic book, but still, she's a normal street level hero, and that's supposed to be realistic. This is the scene. That is the little mist that is very well done. Mike Perkins does the mist effect of the question really well. And there is the door where she is in that room. Here are the men with guns. That's about 30 feet. There goes a guy. She's punching him through the door. And then she is standing in the door, basically saying, who's next? Right? The cocky attitude. Who's next? She's not running through the door. She's standing in the doorway. And the men open fire. Of course they do. They're 3 of them side by side, all aiming at an area roughly 5 feet wide. And then she's punching them. Well, why isn't she dead? Why isn't she dead several dozen times over? They've got automatic hand weapons. She's 30 feet away from them with an unobstructed field of fire and no hiding, nowhere to go. Why isn't she dead? I know it's a comic book, but that is a reach. This is willing suspension of disbelief, and that doesn't make any sense. that moment doesn't make any sense, and that sort of thing bugs me. But I generally liked the issue very much. There's a 3-page discussion that Lois Lane has, again, just dialogue, with a woman that she's trying to cultivate as a source for a story, and she's going over the differences between an anonymous source, deep background, on the record, and laying it out in a way that is more or less accurate, and that I think a lot of readers of this miniseries won't know. They won't know what those terms mean until they read it in this comic. That's kind of neat. But the real reason that I went to the comic shop today, and the real floppy that I was interested in getting, was, of course, Legion of Superheroes #1. This is the Legion of Superheroes #1. There were 2 different covers. One of the covers, let me see if I can show you. I think I saw it in one of these issues as a house ad. One of the covers was this. Legion of Superheroes, and then Superboy and some of our characters flying in the air over Metropolis. I decided to get this one, which is Jonathan Kent. This is John Kent, Superman and Lois Lane's son. I like it. I kind of like this better. It's a little bit more inventive. He's learning. He's going to learn about the Legion of Superheroes in the 31st century. And you've just got the title up here. I kind of like that. And I have my Legion ring on. So you know I'm in it to win it. And I am a big fan of the Legion of Superheroes. I have been since the beginning. I have been reading the Legion of Superheroes since they first appeared. I have read them in every incarnation, and they have been rebooted many, many times. They have been redone many, many times, and the lore has always increased. And then for a couple of years, DC hasn't had the Legion of Superheroes. They haven't appeared in any issue in any format whatsoever, and I guess that gave them the impression that the ground was cleared for superstar writer Brian Michael Bendis to take over and remake the Legion. And we've already seen this. There was a two-part miniseries called Millennium that sort of introduces us to the character of Rose, a 20th century superhero character who is immortal and who lives the 1,000 years between the 21st century and the 31st century, and meets the Legion of Superheroes in the final page of Millennium. She meets them. She has lived the whole time. She goes to their headquarters and she meets the Legion. I showed you this panel before. They're taking a self-portrait, and she interrupts them. And there in the center, you can see, at the front, you can see Ultra Boy. That is, he has brown skin now. I will get to that. But that symbol, that chest symbol, Legion fans will know that is Ultra Boy, regardless of the color of his skin. And front and center there, you can see John Kent, Superboy, teenage Superboy. He is with the Legion, and he is taking a picture with them. That was where Millennium dropped off. And then Legion of Superheroes starts with issue #1. And I went into it knowing already that this is not my Legion of Superheroes, nor is it, in air quotes, the real Legion. Because race swapping has happened. It's the equivalent of gender swapping that I just mentioned, where characters who were white have been made non-white, just because to make some sort of point about diversity and inclusion. I'm sure the people who profess to care about such points don't buy or read comics, and the people who care about the Legion and care that there's a first issue do care that those characters now look different, fundamentally different than they did before. It's not Brian Michael Bendis's property. It's not his to do with as he pleases. The new costumes, absolutely. New conception of powers, sure thing. But a character who has been white-skinned for 50 years is now black-skinned, or Oriental, or I don't even know, blonde. If you are a superstar writer, Brian Michael Bendis, and you are given the Legion of Superheroes, somebody who just walks up to you and says, here is this 50-year-old concept that thousands of fans love and have kept alive through the decades. It's now yours. Do with it anything you want. First of all, no one should ever go to a writer and say that. It's not your right to do that. It's not your property. It's the reason that you even have a call to have something called the Legion of Superheroes as a comic book on a monthly basis is because of years and decades of fan love. Those fans loved the thing they loved. They didn't love just a name. They didn't love something that you're going to remake. So anyway, because of all that, and because I knew that ahead of time, I went into this sort of at arm's length, because DC is currently in the slow process of reprinting the classic years of the Legion that I fell in love with, and that thousands of other people fell in love with. That organic process of falling in love with this team, with this concept of a future team, that can't strike twice. You can't just say, well, I'm calling this thing the Legion of Superheroes, so I demand that you love it. It's either the thing that you love or it's not. We shall see if any of that. I will definitely be following this comic. I will definitely be reading it. I had my moment of doubt about that, but I will. And DC is reprinting those classic era comics, and they're not going anywhere, so I can still enjoy them. So I'm free to read this and see what Brian Michael Bendis makes of it. The problem that I have, apart from that, from race and gender swapping and all that sort of stuff, is this is a big deal. I know it doesn't seem... if you're watching a comic book video on this channel, then you must be a comic book fan. And if you're a comic book fan, then you're immune to the typical sneer of the people who don't read comics, which is, it's just comic books. What difference does it make? If you're going to do something, you should do a good job, regardless of what that something is. And if you're going to take on something that has a treasured history for thousands of readers, you should take it seriously. And this is a terrible, terrible first issue. It's written by Brian Michael Bendis, and it's drawn. The artwork is incredible, by Ryan Sook. Let me give you a sample page here. There you go. There is Saturn Girl introducing John Kent to the Legion of Superheroes. That's just a wonderful, fantastic artwork all throughout. And most of the Legion characters are immediately recognizable. When you see them in a double-page spread, Legion fans will be able to identify virtually everybody in there. Nothing is exactly the same, but things are close enough so that you'll be able to look around there if you're a Legion fan and tell who pretty much everybody is. So there are echoes of tradition. And the storyline involves Jonah, a character named Ultra Boy, who is he has been chasing a series of mercenaries who have an object, a precious object that he is trying to get from them. And at the beginning of the issue, he gets it from them. And he stops them from handing it off to its buyer, a gigantic energy being who is identified at the beginning of this issue as a character named Mordru the Mystic. Now, that won't mean anything to some comic fans, but to Legion fans, it will mean a lot. Mordru the Mystic is one of the oldest Legion villains, and he is pretty much omnipotent. He has been the character at the center of some beloved Legion stories. And in the first few pages of this issue, he identifies himself and then is beaten in 3 panels with a punch to the jaw. Easily. He is beaten easily in the first few panels of this issue, which seems to me to be Brian Michael Bendis telling longtime Legion fans, who are the whole reason why this thing exists, that might have been impressive in your day, but I've got bigger fish to fry. I've got a bigger story to tell. And that's infuriating. But the thing that makes it a bad first issue is that nothing is explained. Characters speak in half sentences and then rush off to the next thing. This is clearly meant to be not a first issue of a comic book, but the first chapter in a graphic novel. And I've mentioned before that most comics are done that way now, and it's maddening. Because it just assumes that you either are going to buy this twice or that you don't need the first issue to make any sense. That's kind of annoying. But it's annoying also on a practical level. And that's the last thing that I want to mention before I tootle off here. Like, for instance, when Ultra Boy brings this item that he has tracked down, when he brings it to Legion headquarters, it sets off an alarm at Legion headquarters. And the Legion, who have been out and about with Superboy, rush back to headquarters. And he identifies himself. Ultra Boy identifies himself. Said, "Sorry about that. It's me. My name is Ultra Boy." When, as we saw, they already know him, so they're not just meeting him then. But even if you futz around with that, even if you say, okay, maybe he's just being ironic, or maybe there's some people in the crowd of Legionnaires that don't know him, so he has to identify himself. Even if that's true, when we get this scene where Saturn Girl introduces Superboy to the Legion of Superheroes, I wonder if it's visible in the crowd here. No, you have to go to the next page. On the next page, one of the characters that meets Superboy is Rose, who says, hi, what does she say? "Hi, Mr. Kent, my name is Rose," and she wants to tell him something, but he rushes off. As I just showed you, at the end of Millennium, which Brian Michael Bendis wrote, and had to have written it at the same time that he wrote this first issue, as you can see, when Rose meets the Legion, Superboy is already there. And so is Ultra Boy. So right out of the gate, it's a little thing, I know, it's a little detail, but right out of the gate, carelessness of a type that superstar writers, write their own ticket writers like Brian Michael Bendis, often are guilty of. So it was great. On one level, it was great for me to see all of these, iconic costumes. And I admit I am partially curious to see where Brian Michael Bendis takes any of this. What callbacks he does to traditional Legion lore and the golden age of the Legion and whatnot, or if any. I'm not optimistic about that, because the first callback that he gets is Mordru the Mystic, and it's disdained. It's disdainful. So we shall see. But we shall see. I will certainly report back. I will keep buying the Legion. And that's it. And it couldn't get more elemental. I got Superman, I got Lois Lane, I got the Legion. So that was my comic book day for today. Pretty elemental. No, absolute carnage or anything like that. It's all stuff that I've been buying for 50 years. So I'm going to wrap this up, you comic book fans, and we will reconvene next week. Who knows? Might be a big collection I could get next week. So I'll see you then. Thank you, BookTube.